Good afternoon. Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society web series. My name is Courtney McWhorter. I'll be your host for today. If you could, please go ahead and send me a message in the chat. Let me know if you can hear me okay. I'd appreciate it. So once again, my name is Courtney McWhorter. I will be your host for today. Before we get started with the webinar, I'd like to share a little bit about Digital Enterprise Society. Digital Enterprise Society is a new nonprofit member association organized to enable the transformation of product development, design, delivery, and maintenance throughout the digital enterprise, regardless of software tools used. We are dedicated to the transformation of the manufacturing enterprise workforce. We'd like to invite you all to join Digital Enterprise Society. The society was formed by a PLM World Transitional Board of Directors. As part of the transition, past PLM World members have been granted free Digital Enterprise Society membership. If you had a login for the PLM World website or attended a PLM World event, including Siemens PLM Connections or a regional user group event, your free membership is waiting. If you did not have a PLM World membership, we invite you to join using the promo code at the bottom of the screen there, webinar09. Once again, my name is Courtney McWhorter. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at Digital Enterprise Society. If you have any questions about accessing your free membership or getting involved, please feel free to contact me. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, Adam Specht. Adam is a Product Development IT Director at Driv, a $6.4 billion global aftermarket and OE automotive component company. He is a quality-driven and process-oriented professional with over 20 years of global engineering, IT, and management experience. His passion is affecting change aimed at the continuous improvement of the processes and tools used to drive product development. Before we get started, I'm going to ask that any questions that you have today, you post for us in the questions field, and we'll have a brief Q&A following Adam's presentation. With that, Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. So yeah, thank you all for joining today. And Courtney, thank you for the fine introduction. So I thought it might be good for us to start out. Well, let's talk about what we're going to cover today first. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to what this company Driv is all about and how it makes for a bit of an interesting story for me to tell you as it relates to PLM and this type of stuff. I'll talk a bit about building a vision and business case for PLM for your business, talking a little bit about what I have done specific to Driv and sometimes in my past. We'll talk about driving digital transformation and how we can actually get things to happen. And then we'll talk a little bit about PLM projects in the context of mergers and acquisitions. Now, before we get started, we have this poll. Thought it might be good for everyone to share a little bit about what your current maturity level is in terms of PLM. So Courtney, can you help with that?
Launching that poll now. You should have the poll up on your screen. The question is, what is the level of PLM implementation at your company? Your options are, there is no PLM tool in place. It is a really big and expensive CAD repository. The foundation of CAD BOM and change is in place. And then finally, the entire product lifecycle is managed. So I'll give you a minute to respond. And the final results are 29% say that it is a really big, expensive CAD repository. 41% say the foundation of CAD BOM and change is in place. And finally, 29% said the entire product lifecycle is being managed. So I'll go ahead and close that poll and turn it back over to you, Adam.
All right, that's good to know. So it sounds like at least everyone that's on this call has some level of PLM implemented. So you're not just starting from scratch, which is really where we're at. So I think that then this gives us a good point to start off on this discussion. So let's talk a little bit about Driv. This Driv company is a kind of a evolution over the past few years. And when I joined the company, I joined Federal-Mogul. So Federal-Mogul, they brought me on to manage and start up their engineering and PLM practice, with the thought that they would split that company into Federal-Mogul Powertrain and Federal-Mogul Motor Parts. Now, as we went through the process of actually splitting it up. We had gone through some PLM implementations here as part of Federal-Mogul Motor Parts. And actually, when I was in Belgium doing some PLM training for our wipers division, we received an email that said, we've just all been bought by this company called Tenneco. So the decision was then to take everything, smush it together with this new company that they also acquired called Öhlins, and then split it apart into two different companies, one being this new Tenneco company, and also the other company being Driv. Now that is planned in 2020. Now, I'm part of Driv, and why is that really relevant to this discussion today? Well, we make lots of different products. So talking a little bit about what we do, if you work on car parts at all, if you know suspension components, Moog is our main suspension component brand. So we do ball joints, control rods, hub assemblies, those kinds of things. Monroe shocks and struts, that's us. But we're a pretty big company that sells to both OE and aftermarket. And as you can see from this illustration, we are truly global. Now, these are some of our brands. And again, like I said, if you have any experience working on cars yourselves, likely you've seen these different brands. If we talk about our revenue, we sell to Volkswagen, GM, Ford, lots of the different big supplier or big OE customers. So we sell to a lot of people, but as Courtney mentioned in the introduction, we're about a $6.4 billion company made up of a lot of stuff. And as I said, we're truly global. Our headquarters is in the United States, but we have 60 manufacturing locations around the world, 27 different engineering centers. And what's interesting about this is over the years, as you saw from the illustration I showed at the start, we've grown through acquisitions and splitting up and acquisitions and divestitures, and it's gone through this series of I'll call it adventures over the years, which has led us to kind of where we're at today. Now, when we take a look at the company structure, and this admittedly has been sanitized to be shared with the public, and it is a pretty close illustration of where we're at today. But fundamentally, we have 13 different product lines. We have a good chunk with aftermarket, where we're talking about gaskets, pistons, oil filters, exhaust, chassis components, brake pads, shocks and struts. We have all of these different product lines, and no effort over the past several decades, as this has all come together, has been made to rationalize any of the tools. And as we start looking at how we grow towards the future, and as we start looking at how do we realize the potential of all of this put together and actually make it happen, well, how do we do that? And I would argue that, rationalizing our PLM system and standardizing on processes is a really good start. But that's good to start out with, but how do you actually convince people to make that happen? That's where we really need to start building a vision and that business case for a PLM. If we have that mess of lots of different product lines with everyone around the world currently doing their own thing for the most part, we could have potentially, even if I go back to this, between our sealing group, which we're talking about, let's say valve cover gaskets. The way that a valve cover gasket is managed from conception through its life cycle in North America is completely different than how we do it in the European Union. That happens in all of the different things. And what is good that I've seen when I've talked about this with other people from other companies, it's not really that unique. There seems to be a lot of people in that same boat. But again, how do we overcome that? Well, so let's talk a little bit about how we might make a vision and pull that business case together for PLM for a company that's like that. Now, there's this standard kind of three-legged stool that has the standard people, process, and tools. Now, everyone is familiar with that. However, you can't just start implementing. You need to be able to build a vision. Now, where does that start? I would say that you always need to start with strategy. Now, the challenge is you need to understand what really is the goal of your company. You can't just go ahead and start saying, all right, we know we need to implement a PLM tool and go off, buy Teamcenter or Windchill, SAP, whichever one, and say, all right, we know we need this tool. We're going to bring it in and we're going to implement it. Well, why are you going to implement? How are you going to measure yourself in terms of success? If you have that top level strategy, what does the company want to be when it grows up? Then you can start to say, this strategy is what my leadership has set out for us. This is what I need to hitch my PLM vision to, so that I can then say, based on your strategy, I am able to take this PLM vision and help you achieve certain number of goals in your strategy. So without a corporate strategy, my perspective is you don't even attempt to start a PLM journey. Once you understand that strategy, then you can start to hook up to it. You can start to identify, how do I demonstrate my success? Now, as we talk about corporate strategy, I would argue that that's where it really starts. We can talk about, um, PLM strategy down at the very bottom here. But when it really comes to it, again, the top level strategies for at least my company, the way we look at it, we have a top level corporate strategy. These are our goals. This is how we're going to go after the market. Now, how do we achieve that? We have a product strategy. So what am I going to sell? And a supply chain strategy. This is how I'm going to sell it. Again, once you establish this and the leadership has agreed on what they're going to sell, how they're going to sell it, how they're going to manage that supply chain, then we can start stepping down below the dotted line here and talk about, okay, let's talk about sales and marketing. Let's understand how engineering is going to operate. Let's talk about what our manufacturing footprint is going to look like. Then that feeds into our IT strategy, which is then supported by things like customer relationship management, ERP, and of course, PLM. Once we identify how PLM strategy can come together and support engineering, manufacturing, and sales, then we start to be able to build this picture. But again, without all of these different strategies and these divisions pulled together, without understanding how is engineering going to manage the development of products, without understanding, are we going to buy products, slap a label on it, and sell it as our own? Are we actually going to manufacture product? Are we going to use third parties to do the manufacturing? All of that informs what that PLM strategy needs to support. So again, don't start with the PLM strategy. You need to do all of this stuff on top before you start really getting into the weeds and start talking about CRM, PLM, ERP, all of those kinds of things. Now, I can tell you that I have started directly with a PLM strategy before. And I will tell you that I've never been successful immediately starting with that. So that's definitely a learning that hopefully I can share with you, is to really focus on the big picture strategy before you start delving down into, this is how I'm going to launch my PLM tools and really what they need to do. Now, when you start to develop that vision and how you start to sell PLM, and I would argue that all of us really need to be um, salespeople to some level. We can't allow the vendors to come in and convince our leadership that PLM needs to happen, because our leaders won't respect that. They'll want us to be able to explain what PLM can bring to us, what problems within that corporate strategy, what initiatives is it going to solve. So when we start talking about how to explain why we need PLM, again, align to the issues that are top of mind with your executives. Now, in my company, I can tell you that the three on the left are truly pieces of the strategy that are going to happen. These are the things that our CEO has said. We're going to reduce our inventory. We're going to document and be able to compare what our planned revenue versus actual revenue is after we've launched products. And of course, we need to reduce rework costs. These are real things that affect real people. But now, when I start looking at this, how do I say what PLM can achieve for us? Well, I've been doing this a long time, so I can tell you that if I need to reduce inventory, well, number one, in my PLM strategy, I need to, of course, manage my CAD and my bill of material. But if I am able to also do something like a duplicate parts analysis, I can then start to look at parts that I can pull out of inventory. I can rationalize things. I need to put classification for reuse in place. Reuse is a good thing. Of course, change management and effectivity management. Now, those things, specifically duplicate part analysis, classification for reuse, I should be able to monetize that. I should be able to say, if I'm able to reduce my part counts and therefore help drive the inventory reduction, I'm going to be able to say how much savings I can really generate for the company. So start to think about corporate strategy versus PLM strategy in this. Now, if we start talking about new product, actual versus committed timing and revenue, well, now I start saying, all right, I need to be able to do project and program management in some way that is linked to my PLM system. I'm not saying that we need to do PLM or project management inside PLM, but we need to be able to link it together. We need to have the capability of looking back at our projects historically after they've been completed, doing our homework and analyzing, all right, where are we at compared to where we thought we were going to be. Additionally, bill of material costing. This is something that would enable us to be able to track real time, where am I at in terms of my planned revenue as we go through the development. Now, if you have huge bills of material, obviously you need to be able to do that. In our case, we look at maybe friction materials. Well, I need to be able to understand what each component of that friction material would be, so that I can then tell you how much brake pads are going to cost. Of course, also our ERP integrations. That's going to allow us to pull financial information from our ERP tools into our PLM tools and be able to aggregate all of this together. Now, reducing rework costs. How would I tie that into a PLM strategy? Well, things like a supplier portal, things like managing our FMEA processes and control plans in our PLM. So again, it's starting to tie this view of what a PLM strategy would be, different components of it, back to what the real world corporate strategy is. If you're able to do this, then you're starting to convince your executives, this is what I can do for you, and this is how I can do it. Now, as I start to build my business case, this is one thing that I tried to do many years ago, and I would say it's probably not a good idea. If you're going to try and show your ability to implement PLM just by showing efficiency, for example, if we got an average user that's $30 an hour, they're going to have a 10% efficiency gain, and I've got 1,000 users, I'm going to save 6.24 or 600 and or $6,240,000 a year. Don't try this at home. Your CFO will kick you out of the room. It's happened to me. I can tell you it's not fun. The right way to do this is to start talking about real numbers that you can measure. Again, what are my strategic initiatives that I need to achieve against, that I need to support with my PLM strategy, that I can then show real world savings? So for example, if I have a certain number of duplicate parts in inventory and I can save us a certain amount of money, then that's going to be something I can actually demonstrate. If we have a certain number of parts that are scrapped per year because we don't manage our obsolescence, well, there's dollar figures there. If we want to talk about fixing tools and the amount of money that we spend doing that because they were built to wrong tooling designs, again, you start to see that what you need to do is the homework to understand what are the problems that you're trying to solve and what are the dollar figures that you can tie to that you can save the company by implementing a PLM tool. This is not easy to do, and it takes a lot of time. But if you're able to do this, what you're able to then do is start to show how you can actually self-fund a PLM initiative. So if you get your foundational PLM in place, and you know that by doing that, you're going to save X number of dollars, then that is your ROI, of course. And you should be able to then make a good case for your next phases by showing this type of information, by showing real world numbers. Now, executives like this. They don't like that. So let's talk a little bit about driving digital transformation. Now, the one thing that I would say is this really something new, or is it something we've been part of for decades? I can tell you that my first job out of college while I was doing an internship was doing mechanical drafting work. What I was doing was taking what an older gentleman that I was working with, he was a fantastic engineer, but he hated computers. He had this massive drafting board in his office. And what he would do is he would sketch out machine designs for me in this, big fancy layout. And then my job was to take that and put it into CAD, Unigraphics at the time. Now, that right there, in my mind, was my first view of a digital transformation. We were getting away from paper-based design, using the pencil and all the fancy drafting tools, getting into more of a modern, current 3D parametric modeling tool. So I would argue that that's been going on for a long time. And really, we could look at each of these different components that we have on the screen and say, most of those individually have gone through some level of a digital transformation. The difference between the individuals that we see on this screen and what we're doing now is really this. We're really talking about the information now. We're really talking about how information flows from the time you have a product idea through all of these crazy red arrows to the point of being a product out the door. All the red stuff here on the screen, I view as PLM, because what it's doing is it's tying all this together. It's making product information available to all, and it's managing the true life cycle of the product. So when we talk about digital transformation, it's more the information is where we're at right now and how we manage that, so that we're talking about truly one version of the truth. Not just, I'm sure I have a drawing that is the correct revision, but I can now take a set of requirements and trace that all the way through the DFMEA, PFMEA control plan and understand what impacts in the product. So you have this entire digital thread, if you will, that is the overall product life cycle. In my mind, that is where the digital transformation is happening now. Now, when we start talking about the overall process of doing this, the first thing that we need to do is have a foundational understanding of what best practices are and really what is the art of the possible, so that everybody, like I said, has the same foundation and can make informed decisions about what needs to happen in terms of your PLM journey. This is the best place to start. We should be able to talk about having everything linked so that I should be able to search for a part number and be able to find all of this stuff in one basic common place. Now, as we start to talk about how do I prioritize things, this is where it starts to get a bit more interesting. Now, how did we do this at my company? As I said, we started out, we explained to people what the art of the possible was. But then what we did was we pulled everyone together, well, not everyone, but a core group of cross-functional leadership from each of the different product groups into a couple-day workshop. And what we did is we started out with a set of capabilities that needed to be put in place. So we used the Post-it notes. We handed Post-it notes out to each of the leaders from engineering, quality, purchasing, manufacturing. And we asked them, all right, in the context of closed loop quality, in the context of smart manufacturing, in the context of performance engineering, what are the capabilities that you need to be able to be more effective in what you do from day to day, whether it's developing, managing, manufacturing a product? So we were able to pull all of these things together. And then we took all of them and put them into a certain level of priorities. So in our case, we said business priority 1. We said one set of master data. Now, when the business came forth and said one set of master data as the very first thing, I said, okay, now we have a chance, because this was the first time that I have ever seen anyone actually bring up master data as an engineering and purchasing function. That's typically IT or more data-driven people that say, oh, we need to have master data. Of course, requirements management, configuration management, part classification, product costing, materials management, those were all identified as things that we needed to have as a priority 1. Priority 2, we had supplier portals, integrations with different business apps, computer-aided engineering management, so I need to manage my results files, those kinds of things, program management, reporting, resource management, all good stuff. And business priority 3, which hopefully at some point we will get to, but then they started talking about knowledge-based engineering, model-based engineering, plant simulation, those kinds of fancier things. But what we were able to do is get the leadership from various functions in the company to agree on what the priorities were. So as we start out down this path, we're able to say, this is what we have to be working on. And if somebody comes to me and says, well, I need to be able to do resource management while I'm working on part classification, I need to be able to say, well, that's not the priority right now. That's something that we're going to get to further down the road. So this was a very successful way to go about this and to get alignment cross-functionally about what's important. So after we have the set of priorities that we've put forward, we then need to take a little bit of a look at the current processes and tools that we have against industry best practices. Now, there's a few ways we could do this, but what we worked out is basically putting out a assessment internally. And the goal of this is to have the individual people within the product lines, so certain key levels of management and users, to go through and really rank themselves and rank our systems in terms of, what are their capabilities in terms of maturity. So you can look at this really as a maturity model that we put together. So if we look at this, and this is actually a real thing that we did, this is not just faked data for this presentation. So if we look at product data management, for example, level 1 would be product data stored on network drives and all over the place. Admittedly, that's what some of our product groups have right now. All product related data is stored in common global PLM system. Well, that's pretty good. Level 3, requirements traceability from ideation through design into product test results. That's the next level up. Level 4, new technology introduction, new part introduction. Processes are managed in a common linked system with predictive resource management. Now we're starting to get fancy. Level 5, manufacturing execution is fully integrated into our PLM system, facilitating informed operational decision making. Now, part of the reason why I wanted to have you all do the poll at the beginning was so that I would know what my audience was, but also for you to start to see a bit of what a maturity model could look like for PLM. This is a very powerful tool. It helps people kind of have that eye-opening moment to recognize, well, really what we have to work with isn't necessarily the best. It also gives you a view of what your customers, what your users think about the systems that they have to work with, right? So this is a very powerful set of tools to be able to leverage. Now, in my case, I did this for PLM systems as well as our toolkit, because I also manage our CAD, CAM, and FEA tools. But there's a vision, I think, here for a maturity model is very powerful for you to use to get people to start to really think about what's important and kind of current state. So after we have an assessment, that assessment then starts to inform our next step, which is really developing that roadmap. Now, when we talk about a roadmap, the first thing we need to understand is, should we do a big bang effect? Can it be done? Should I do all of this stuff? And I think actually looking back, I should have set a poll up to say, should we do the big bang or not? I can tell you that I've been parts of attempted big bangs before, and I've never seen it be successful. There are companies that have millions and millions of dollars to spend, which might make it possible to do a big bang, but I will tell you, for the most part, if I'm looking at a destination at the top of this vertical wall, what's the easiest way to get there? Am I going to put a rope up and then try and climb the wall? I would argue probably not. I would argue that it's better to have a staircase that's going to get me up to the goal. So with that vision, we put together a step-by-step, this is how we want to implement PLM roadmap. So we were able to identify what our foundational capabilities need to be. The foundation being basically core product data and configuration management. So CAD BOM change, that first piece of it. The next priority is traceability. So requirements management, product costing, CAE test data management. The second priority then is collaboration, which includes program management and resource management. The next level up is integration. Now, what you can see is this is extracted out of that prioritization chart that I showed you a couple of slides ago. All we did is turn it on its side and break it up into more digestible chunks, because implementing what I showed you as business priority 1 all at once would have been far too much for my company to absorb. So we decided we'd take this, break it into digestible steps, and we'd have that kind of stair step to get to the top of what our goals are. So we have our roadmap, and we need to start to plan and execute this thing. I would argue that up to this point has probably been the easiest work. Planning and actually pulling this off, that's when it starts to get more challenging. So let's talk a little bit about tips and best practices from things that I've learned over the past, 20 years of implementing things. I've done SAP, I've done Team Center, I've done an old tool called Eigner. I've been through several PLM implementations. So this is what I've found really helps make things like this successful. So as we start talking about this in the context of acquisitions, I would argue that understanding the people and process, that's where the real hard work starts within the acquisition process. Other parts of the company, of course, have had to deal with integration of financial systems and all of this. That's important. But when we start talking about integrating design processes, integrating design tools, making people start to really understand how to work together, that's where we start getting into the meat of this. First off, as we go through this, the business has to identify their key process owners. You as a PLM professional working on this type of project work, you cannot take ownership of the processes. Push that out to the business. Engineering should manage the engineering processes. Purchasing should manage the purchasing processes. Quality should manage their quality processes, et cetera, et cetera. In my case, I report up into IT. I don't own any processes at this point. I can give them informed information. I can help them, but I don't own them. Now, how do I help them? Well, I've done a lot of process work over the years, so I can help them document what their business processes are. And that is the next thing. You must document all the processes that are in scope. If you ask somebody, so do you have a process for doing what you do for designing products? Of course they're going to say, yeah, I've got a process for designing products. Well, can you show it to me? Well, no. I will tell you, until you have someone sit down and actually write out their business process, no one really understands how they do what they do. And every time someone writes down a process, whether it's in a swim lane diagram, a value stream map, there's lots of different ways you can do this. Once they start to document their business process, their eyes start to open. They start to realize, oh my gosh, this is how I'm actually doing what I'm doing. And all the people we work with are smart people. Once they start to see this, they're going to start to realize the need to make changes. And PLM can help support those changes. So document business processes, make sure that they're written out in a way that everyone can share them. Once you have the business processes, you need to identify the dependencies between them. So for example, if I have a tool design process, that tool design process should be linked back to my product design process because my tools are going to manufacture the product. If you have them running in two separate sets of processes and you don't understand the dependencies between them, you're likely going to have tools that aren't going to make the product that you need to make. So the dependencies should be also included in your process map. And my advice to you is refuse to proceed until all of this stuff is complete. You will fall down all otherwise. Now, as we start talking about collaboration and communication within the team, most important is to understand the requirements. Now, the requirements are tied to both the business process. This is how we're going to manage our product. They're tied to the corporate strategy in terms of what are the PLM components we've agreed that we're going to start out with. Once you have that set of requirements, you must get business sign off and then start implementation. Do not proceed past go until you have sign off on the requirements. If you just start saying, all right, I'm going to implement PLM and doing what you think is right, you're going to miss. Make sure that there's alignment between yourself and the business by having a good set of requirements that you can communicate back and forth on, that they have signed off on. My second piece of information here is find your supporters and keep them happy. There are going to be people that are going to be proponents of a PLM implementation. Those can be your best friends. They can help influence the business. They're going to be the ones that can help you develop your tools. They're the people you want to keep happy. Also, identify your naysayers. There's going to be people always out there that say, oh, this stinks, this doesn't work, blah, 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 blah. Well, I tend to break naysayers like this into two different categories. Those with influence, if you have people that have influence and say, blah, 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 this stinks, you need to fix that. If someone is just a complainer that really doesn't have any influence, don't waste your time with them. You've got more things to do. So those are the two categories I break them into. Now, one of the new things that I have done over the past few years in terms of our development processes that actually has really helped us work with the business more successfully is to implement more of an agile process. Now, I was at a PLM conference last year where someone was talking about, can you do PLM in an agile method? And I was thinking to myself, well, as a matter of fact, I've been doing it for the past couple of years. Now, the benefit to this is in an old waterfall methodology. You start out, you understand your requirements, you go off, do your work, then you have your results. You might have been working for 6 months, and then at the end, you kind of do, ta-da, it's done. Well, what happens when somebody comes back and says, well, that's not really what I wanted? Well, if you have more of an agile methodology, where you start off with a set of requirements with kind of what you need to know, you have a little bit more of a sprint process, so a shorter development time, where you then get feedback from your people that were helping develop the requirements, you show it to the business, get their feedback, and have more feedback loops. You're going to wind up spending the same amount of time, but you're going to be much more successful, because what happens along the way are those users are able to give you feedback on what you developed. It also helps them feel more engaged in the development of this, and they'll then be more likely in the end to actually adopt it. So my recommendation to everyone is to always start using this, requirements, sprint, review, kind of have this constant cycle of feedback. And what's interesting is I've seen a lot of different companies that don't do this. But I would really encourage you to take a look at the agile processes for running these types of projects, because it winds up very powerful. So let's talk a little bit about data migration. This one is something that I felt I had to include in this presentation because it's possibly the least glamorous piece of a PLM implementation, but if you don't do it right, it's going to make people reject the system. So what I've learned over the years is don't ever proceed with a data migration until the data is clean. If you have a bunch of users to say, just put it in there, we'll get it cleaned up once it's in there, don't do it. Don't do it. You'll wind up cleaning this stuff up for the next 20 years. Work with the people that own the data to have them clean their own data up. You could bring in third parties to do some of it, but really they can't own it. You might have, partners come in and say, I can do your data migration for you. I can solve all your problems. No, they can't. No one really understands the data except for the data owners. So make sure that the team that owns the data does the cleanup and make them sign off on it and say, yep, we agree that it's cleaned. Then you put it in. And don't forget, practice rehearsals make things perfect. Don't just assume you're going to be able to do one load. You're going to have to go through several cycles of trying it out, cleaning it up, getting validation, do it again. My best data migrations at this point, I'd say we go through 2 or 3 cycles, just to make sure that the users have looked at it and that they're perfectly comfortable with the stuff. Now, last but not least, in terms of actually executing one of these projects, is the training piece. Now, I thought it'd be kind of funny to say make it sustainable, and then I was thinking about that, and really that should be your goal. You should be able to make your training sustainable in that it's easy to update as changes are made to the systems. It should make your PLM system sustainable because in some way, people that are new to the tool can get in and familiarize themselves without having a big training event. Now, what does that all mean? I would say that starting out, one big training event, that's okay for the initial rollout. But when you get down to it, after that big training event and after the initial rollout, you're going to have people leave the company. You're going to have new hires come in. You're not going to want to run big PLM training events constantly for the rest of your life. So what we've done internally here, and we did this actually at my last company with a lot of success, we identified some of our best users and we recruited them as super users. Now, the goal is that they're going to help with onboarding of new people. They're going to help with trouble resolution. So they kind of become the first point of asking questions within those locations. And in my last company, we actually gave a financial bonus at the end of the year to encourage people to do this super user thing. They wound up arranging user group meetings in the locations, talking about ways that could improve the system, and then they fed that back to the team that works on the PLM systems. So the concept of super users is extremely powerful. Also, online training. And this is something that we're just working on now. If you think about how do you solve problems at home? Let's say I need to change the alternator on my car. It used to be that I'd have to go find a manual somewhere that showed all the step-by-step instructions. But now, all I do is I pull out my cell phone. I pull up YouTube and say, all right, how do I change a alternator on a 2012 Chevrolet Silverado? How do I do this? Watch a 3-minute video and aha, I've got it good to go. So what we're working on now is putting together that methodology of training for PLM. What that's going to be able to do is as there's updates, people can go view the videos. If we have new users come in, they can go view them. So we're implementing this kind of YouTube model for training, and I'm pretty well convinced it's going to be extremely successful. So I suggest that you all, take a good hard look at that type of methodology and think of how it could apply to your company. So with that, let's wrap it up. I talked a little bit about strategy And I will say that top-level strategic decisions and definitions must be first. If you don't have that top-level vision, you've got nothing to align to and no goals to measure yourself against. When we talk about strategic alignment with management, you must align to the management first, but then also take a look at the bottom-up support. So getting the people that are the individual users also engaged. And there were some various ways that I talked about doing that. You must explain the value of PLM with real-world examples. Remember, don't just say I'm going to save the company millions of dollars just based off of efficiency. Break the implementation into digestible chunks. So things that your company can actually achieve with a stepped roadmap. Processes must be established first. Then you can start looking at PLM. Don't ever start to say, we can massage processes in the context of a PLM. Do the process work first, then PLM. Get user and business sign off on everything. If they do that, then we can say they're aligned. And last but not least, be a good steward of the company, make your training sustainable. So with that, are there any questions that I can answer for anyone?
Yeah, Adam, it looks like we did have one come in through the questions. When you have rolled out PLM in the past, how have you confirmed users actually know how to use the system?
Well, so one of the things we did at my last company, we actually created a test that we gave people. Our management was very firm that people must use the tool. They must learn how to use the tool. And we wanted proof that they were able to do that. So we actually gave people a written test with certain information that they would have to know how to do. And it was actually kind of interesting because we forced people to retake the test until they got it right. And this was engineering leadership that wanted that. And I'll tell you, that was extremely successful.
Thanks, Adam. We have a comment actually that came in through the questions field here. PLM tool development should probably happen in parallel with process definition updates. New tools provide new options for process. We don't want to force the old process into the new tool, or we may not get the benefits from the new tool. Do you have any comments on that or any thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. I would agree that PLM will give you options in terms of process that you would not have otherwise. But that statement is valid if you have PLM in place already and you're maturing what you've already established as a baseline. I would say that you have to have a certain level of process maturity to implement PLM, and then based off of that, once you have your foundational elements in place, use that as your springboard to do things that PLM can truly enable that are different than what you could do previously.
Thanks, Adam. We do have a few more questions coming in. Again, everybody, if you have any questions for Adam, please go ahead and put them in the questions box here in the GoToWebinar platform. How to assess the PLM cost was one question that we had come in.
How to assess the PLM cost?
Correct.
Well, that's actually not the easiest thing to do, I'll tell you. What I have done in the past is obviously you have things like licensing and the servers it needs to run on, ongoing maintenance, those kinds of things. But in terms of what is the true cost of PLM, that's where you start to having to be able to calculate your return on your investment. So what I talked about earlier in the presentation is being able to take real dollar savings and show those versus the cost of the tool and the cost of the tool implementation. And then those start to calculate your ROI. I will tell you that I have never seen a PLM implementation where you start to say, yes, this is going to save me millions and millions of dollars right out of the box. It's likely going to take some time to get there because let's say we're talking about part rationalization. If I implement my PLM tool and I know that it's going to enable me to reuse things, it's going to take me time to get through that process and time to retrain my engineers to say, well, you need to go into the system, pick out a standard component and use that. So it is a challenging thing to do, but I would calculate it based off of the savings I'm able to realize versus the cost of the implementation.
Thank you, Adam. We do have another question. Do you do process improvement or just process automation?
We do process improvement. I would say that once the process, that core base process is implemented, then we start to look at optimization. Once you start to understand how the tool works and how your systems are able to support you in new ways. So yeah, we do the process improvement as well. But again, once we have that foundation in place, that's when you start to do the improvement.
Another quick question. Did you implement PLM for everyone all at once, or do you do something different?
So we actually put it together so that those product groups that we showed you earlier in the slide deck, so our sealing group, our engine group, our braking group, those are all, you know, billion-dollar organizations with multiple locations. So we went after each one individually. We did not try and go for the whole company at once. So individual product groups, and really we went location by location.
Well, thank you, Adam, so much for your presentation today, and thank you all for joining us. I think that's all the questions that we had come in.
Yep, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Once again, here is Adam's contact information I have up on the screen for you if you'd like to reach out to Adam, and thank you again, Adam, for your presentation. Adam was also a guest on the second episode of our Digital Enterprise Society podcast that launched back in June. So we invite you to listen to his episode, How to Avoid a PLM Train Wreck. And new episodes are released every Wednesday on your favorite podcast streaming platform. I also encourage you to join us for our next webinar, Be an Extraordinary Presenter, presented by Digital Enterprise Society Executive Director Wendy Holliday on Thursday, January 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Also, you can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Once again, my name is Courtney McWhorter. If you have any questions about Digital Enterprise Society, I am happy to help. Visit digitalenterprisesociety.org to learn more.